Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Pure Joy Podcast. I'm your host, Elena Love, and today I'm coming to you from Bozeman, Montana, where I've been staying for the last month and plan to stay through October. And brought my little trailer out here with me, a little A-line trailer that's one of those fold-down trailers, and then you just pop it up when you're ready to camp. And I decided to come to Bozeman just on a whim. So my landlord decided, because, rent prices and real estate prices in Bend, Oregon are insane at the moment, that she needed her house for her son who did not have a place to live, which is fair. I cried for a day, and then I got over it and took a month to pack up all my belongings, sell most of them. Actually, I sold pretty much all of them. My bed, my couches, my furniture. The only stuff I kept was what could fit into a 10 by 10 storage unit. And a couple friends took my plants because I knew I was coming back. So left because I don't have any place to live in Bend until November. I'm going to be renting out a little above garage unit, super cute, has a nice chefly type kitchen, and they're going to Mexico for 6 months, so I get to live in their house. And so I had 2 months to do something with myself with, and I said, okay, where do I want to go? Where pick a place on the map, and Montana, for some reason, I don't know why, Montana, and then Bozeman, I just kind of narrowed it down to Bozeman. So since then, this is now almost the end of September, and since then I came to Bozeman to this beautiful house that I'm staying at. I happened to find a really great woman who needed me to stay and watch her cat and pay for a little bit of rent, but not a huge amount, and get to live in her house for 2 months. So here I am, and it's lovely, and I'm right near hiking, and I go on some kind of hike every day. That's kind of my commitment, to do lots of movement while I'm here. During this time I've been here, I actually got to drive down to Idaho to a little event called Rabbit Sticks, which is, I guess you call it, you do call it Primitive Skills. You can look it up, Rabbit Stick, and it's once a year in Idaho, and then they do them like 4 times a year around the country. And it's really all about what our primitive ancestors, how they lived. So I got to learn a lot of new skills, and actually spent quite a bit of time learning flute playing and drumming, and learning about how other tribes use drummings, like what the messages were with each drum sound and everything, and that was really cool. And then with the flute playing, the whole theme of the class was how to tune into your heart, like how to connect through flute playing. So it was really beautiful, because we started out by ohming, and then we used our flutes. He showed us just a few simple ways to play the flute, wooden flutes. We used our flutes to do an ohm sound as well, and there was about 12 of us in there, and then we ended up walking through camp down to the river, playing our little flute sounds, which was really fun. I also learned how to make gourds, like how to make gourds into a bowl and a cup, and that was really cool too, just thinking about like how much time it took our ancestors just to make a cup. And then I ended up burning some symbols into the cup with, you're supposed to kind of use like wood or metal from a fire, but I ended up using a little tool that you could plug in. I cheated because I wasn't able to get to that till I got back home. What it did, though, is it helped me to respect and admire what our ancestors have gone through for us to live this really modern life of convenience, and how blessed and lucky we really are. Anybody listening to this podcast probably fits into the same category of like, we're buying organic food. We're living in comfort. We can turn the heat on when we're cold. We can turn the air conditioning on when we're hot. We don't have to worry about predators. I mean, here in Montana, there are bears, grizzlies and black bears. Haven't seen one yet. People do have harnesses with bear spray in them, which I'm considering getting. But back in the day, we didn't have bear spray. Like, what did you do? You had to tune more into nature. And so really the purpose of this podcast today, of this talk, is to talk really about preparing yourself for simplifying your life. How about that? Because I realized I'm a minimalist now. Like, I always wanted to be a minimalist. And what's funny about synchronicities and about getting what you asked for, that whole saying, be careful what you ask for, you just might get it. I was wanting to move out of that house for a while. It was a 3-bedroom house, and I was renting out the 2 other rooms occasionally, but I was never making enough money to really help cover the rent that much, just because I'm too nice and I never charged enough rent, or I never charged for utilities. I know I'm a bad person for collecting rent, because I'm always just like, oh, you can't afford it. But so anyway, all that aside, I decided I don't need to live in a 3-bedroom house. I don't need to be renting out the rooms and paying more than everybody else and just all the stuff that comes along with renting out rooms in a house, being in charge of everything. So when I sold everything and I'm like, all I have with me is my car and my little pop-up trailer, which weighs maybe 1,200 pounds, I realized, wow, this is great. Like, I don't have to worry about anything. My expenses went way down all of a sudden. And yeah, so I'm just on the road enjoying whatever I have in my suitcase, clothing wise. And I did bring the stuff I brought the most of was cooking stuff because I knew I was going to do cooking class as well as here. You know, I do have a blender with me and everything still, but I feel like my life has simplified way down. And I want to keep it that way. And so today I was going to talk a little bit about prepping and what that's like and just preparing for, you know, anything. If gas prices go up and then consequently food prices go up because trucks have to pay for gas to deliver the food. And sometimes, like when COVID first hit, everybody panicked and bought all the food. I mean, it could be something as simple as that, or it could be, depending on where you live, some other kind of disaster, some other kind of emergency preparedness, fires, hurricanes, volcanoes, who knows? And so I just, you know, we did a blog on this, but I wanted to kind of cover a few things that just might be good to start thinking about. And one thing Caitlin and I love to do is our cooking classes. So we just did an Instant Pot class recently, just yesterday actually. And we taught, I think, like 10 recipes. And what I'm realizing and what we kind of promoted to the people that took the class was, hey, this is great food to pre-cook and freeze. And so since it's just me here, and I made all this food for the class, I just took some quart-sized Ziploc bags and froze individual servings and labeled them and put them flat in the freezer. So that's one way to just be prepared. Like if you're going to make a dish, you know, something, you know, if you followed us for a while and you're doing our veggie keto dishes, like a stir fry or some of the enchiladas, we make these amazing enchiladas with non-flour tortillas. We use cassava tortillas, which are made out of a root versus grains and things like that. Or if you're making chili or whatever for the fall, just always double it or triple it and freeze extra and know that that'll last for 6 months, even a year. Like maybe it won't taste as good in a year, but if something did happen, you know you've got food prepared that way. Another great way to prepare is canning and making sauerkraut. And I kind of put those in the same category because when you make sauerkraut the way we make it, you put it in a mason jar and you let it ferment in there and then it kind of just seals itself and you can keep that in the fridge for up to a year. So that's why I think why sauerkraut was invented, because back when they didn't have refrigeration, they had to have a way to preserve all these fall foods for the winter, because there wasn't going to be any food growing, like in Russia where kraut started. So thinking about that, like canning all your fall harvest right now, like if you have apple trees or peach trees, or you go to the farmer's market and they're like, oh my gosh, we have so many tomatoes, like learning how to can things. And that would just be something great you can take online, like find a YouTube class. We do have some classes on how to make kimchi and how to make sauerkraut on the website. And then the next thing is just buying supplies of canned, like I'm not big on promoting canned food in general because, you know, I'm into whole foods, fresh foods, organic foods, but you can buy some good organic canned foods to use as emergency backup, like canned tomatoes, which you could easily put into a soup or a stew. You know, things like beans. I'm not really into grains, but you could have like a grain that you might be willing to eat. Like I won't eat anything with gluten in it, but maybe you do. Maybe you love oats. That would be a great backup emergency food. In my case, I have beans on hand and I believe I have some white rice because I do better with white rice than brown rice, believe it or not. And quinoa. So, you know, things like that. And the other thing, really, the biggest thing I think is, well, you know, you got your nuts and seeds and you probably want to soak and dehydrate those ahead of time. Dehydration is another great one, which is, again, all those fruits that you could also dehydrate. Like apples, just put a little bit of lemon juice on them and dehydrate them. You could dehydrate things like bananas. You know, if you're into higher carb stuff, you can dry fruit. The only ones that don't dry well are things like blueberries and cranberries that are really low sugar because they just turn really rock hard. That's why usually they're sweetened with something before they're dried when you buy them in the store. And nuts and seeds, just soak all your nuts and seeds overnight and just dehydrate them all. And then you can store those either in the freezer, the fridge, or even your cupboard. So it just depends on what your diet is, obviously. Don't buy a bunch of back stock of things that you would never eat. Other people that I know that are doing prepping, just, we're all kind of like thinking about it now with all the craziness that's been going on lately. They're buying these containers that, like, you can buy a container, I think maybe on Amazon, maybe REI, that have a bunch of freeze-dried food in them, and you can buy the kind of food that you would eat. So one of the recommendations is don't buy food you're not going to eat. Like, if you would never eat beans, then don't have a ton of lentils and beans in your cupboard. For me, if I'm never going to eat gluten, which I know I won't, not even in a pinch, I'm not going to have bread or wheat berries as backup. I'm just not going to do that. The other thing is sprout some seeds for sprouting, like alfalfa seeds, broccoli seeds. You could have wheat berry seeds for growing wheatgrass. Having a kitchen garden is huge. Like, that could really save you, because if you can't get fresh greens for whatever reason, if there was an emergency and the power went down for a while, I don't know, I'm just talking about preparing for the worst. You don't have to, but just thinking about it. If you could grow your own sprouts, if you still have access to water and dirt, which you can just grab from your garden, then you can grow your own sprouts in trays. And just kind of think about the things you might want to know ahead of time and start learning them now versus waiting, because if there was no electricity, there would be no internet. So just think about that as well. And then I do kind of want to move into water, because water is, of all things, we can fast people have fasted for 40 days or longer. I think the longest someone water fasted was 370 or 80 days, so over a year. I mean, that's not typical. Most of us are not going to fast that long, but water is probably the number one thing to have on hand. So I recommend having, well, for me right now, since I'm traveling, I only have a couple 5-gallon water bottles, and then a bunch of quart-size ones, like the little growlers, and I keep a couple of them in my car, and then I have some here at the house, and you always want to make sure they're full. And so just getting purified water, or knowing where there's a spring. There's a website called findaspring.com, that'll be in the show notes below. You can find if there's a local spring near you. There's not in Bozeman, I looked, but there was back in Bend. I had 2 places I could go for spring water, and I tested it. It's fine. I never got Giardia. I never got sick. You can send the water in and have it tested if you're worried about it. And so those are kind of some things that you can do to prep for just knowing you're prepared. And also having some kind of network of friends that you can talk to about these things. And there are places, in each town that you could probably just look up to find meetup groups or things like that of people that are preparing. And this is in no way meant to be like alarming or to say this is going to happen. I just think because it's fall also, starting to think about living primitively or living the way our ancestors did, all those things, like what did they do before winter hit? Well, they collected their honey and they gathered nuts and seeds, and if they were not vegan, obviously, they hunted for animals and they dried it. But you could, if you're vegan and watching this, you could just use plant things. If you're not vegan, then the sky's the limit. You could get beef jerky. That's a great backup food as well. And so, yeah, that's kind of just, it's going to be a short one today. I just wanted to talk a little bit about prepping and why you should prep, and also living minimally, how freeing it is. Something to consider, maybe try. If you have to move, maybe it'll be a good time to downsize, because I'll never live in a big house again unless I'm living in community. And that's the other thing, is living in community. What a great way to have, a life. My dream that I'm still going to experience is living in community where maybe I have my own little yurt on the land, or little tiny home on the land, and everybody else does too. And then we have a community house where we cook together, someone that's in charge of gardening, landscaping, whatever all the different jobs are. You rotate jobs, but you work as a community. And think about how much easier things are in community. There's this show, and it's called Alone. And they take 10 people and they send them out into the wilderness. They get 5 miles of land. And it's usually right before winter hits, so on purpose. And if they stay for 100 days, they win $1 million. And so three of the people that were on that show were at this primitive skills workshop that I was at for a week, and they talked about it. And basically they were saying, a couple of the gals were saying they've done other shows where they got to work with people versus being all alone and having to build your living structure and having to hunt for animals and having to find food and all the things you do, boil the water every day that you can drink. They said by far the being with a group was way better. Maybe it wasn't as fun sometimes, just dealing with other personalities, but for survival and for overall just health and well-being, togetherness is super important. I really agree with that. That's why one of my goals is to have a healing center that is also a community living situation. Imagine that dream for yourself or for me or for everyone. And as the world evolves, we can decide, if you're not happy with the way you're living now, that you can change it up. And that's the biggest thing that I think I've learned in all my years, being married with a child for 14 years and then getting divorced and then having my son die and then being all alone again. I'm like, wow, that was an interesting cycle of my first half of my life, maybe the first third of my life if I live till I'm 100. And now I'm in a place where I'm traveling by myself and I don't have any belongings really, except for the couple things I mentioned. And today I was kind of like, I've had a lot of time to contemplate. That's the one nice thing about being alone, is really a lot of time to go on hikes and think about things. And I thought, I really want to be open to whatever comes my way. Like, I don't want to resist anything, because being alone is easy in a lot of ways. You don't have anybody to argue with. You don't have anybody that you have to compromise with. I love people though. So I love being in relationship. I love having friends. I love community as well. But you do get kind of used to being by yourself and just whatever you want to do, you get to do. I was thinking about that and I was like, well, I'm open. And I think that's the biggest thing whenever, if disaster does strike or something changes in your life. It could be financial as well. Like you just can't no longer afford the house you're in or the rent where you're living. Like, simplifying is great. It's not what I'm used to, but it's a new thing and I'm excited about it just to see where it's going to take me. And keeping a positive attitude, I think in all of this, like I think about like Hurricane Katrina and all the stuff that's happened in New Orleans and just different places in the world where when disaster hits, people tend to come together. And I'm not praying for any kind of disaster, but why not just start coming together before anything happens, building your relationships in your community and be willing to like push your comfort zone a little bit. I know for me, that's what I'm doing. Like, I'm going to push my comfort zone and see where it takes me. Like, be a little bit more brave when it comes to meeting people, because sometimes I can be shy, believe it or not, even though I have a podcast and I teach and I do videos and I've been teaching for 20 years. And when I'm on stage, I'm super not shy. But when it comes to meeting people one-on-one, I can get a little shy. And so I guess that's one of my goals this month the month of October, is to push my boundaries of shyness a little bit and be willing to meet up with people or go to, like, there's a new meetup group that I might be going to next week, being a little more outgoing in public, the health food store. Oh, that's the other thing too. In Bozeman, there's only one co-op. There's no other health food stores. There's no Whole Foods. There's no natural grocers. There's nothing other than, it's called Bozeman Co-op, I think. Oh my gosh, their prices are crazy. Absolutely crazy. So I'm like, I don't think I'm going to shop there anymore. So that's a big one for me, because I've always been like, oh, I shop at the health food store. I usually in Bend, I'll shop at natural grocers. And so I'm going into regular grocery stores and looking in the organic section. And if they don't have it organic, then I'm not getting it. And so it's limiting my food options right now, but that's okay. And that's pushing my comfort zone a little bit too, because I'm not going to pay $9 for a little basket of figs. I couldn't believe it. I was like, I can't believe I bought those. And then the blueberries are twice the price they are in Bend. And I know the Pacific Northwest has a lot of berries. And I know California's produce is cheaper where I used to live, because that's where a lot of it's grown. So I do understand Montana is a northern state. Things are harder to get here. But then I go to another store in the same city and it's like a third of or 2/3 of the price. So I think it's just the co-op is deciding that they're charging more for whatever reason. And so I'm deciding that I'm going to push my comfort zone and not shop there. And then save my save my funds for other things, other fun adventures. So thanks for listening today, and I hope that this helps you to think more about preparing. And there's a really great website out there called urbansurvival.com. I will look that up and post that as a link. Don't get overwhelmed by the site because it's crazy, the amount of information, but it's one that you can just start looking at. And it's all focused on people that live in cities and how to be prepared. This guy does he catches his own water. He lives in Arizona, and he's just got all kinds of ideas for how to survive in an urban environment. So good luck to you, and I'll see you next time. Thanks for joining. Bye.